Moj život je izgledao kao bajka. Znaš, imala sam sretan brak s Javierom, prekrasnim muškarcem kojeg sam upoznala na fakultetu. Zaljubili smo se ludo i nakon nekoliko godina hodanja odlučili smo napraviti veliki korak i vjenčati se. Vjenčanje je bilo san koji se ostvario, okruženi obitelji i prijateljima koji su nam željeli sve najbolje. Moja sestra blizanka Valerija bila je moja kuma. Uvijek smo bile nerazdvojne otkako smo bile mala djevojčica i dijelile smo sve. Here is the rest of your text translated into. Sve od odjeće do tajni. Bila je moj povjeritelj, moja druga polovica. Valerija je također bila sretno udata za svog supruga Martina i imali su dvoje preslatke djece. Javier i ja smo također željeli osnovati obitelj. Kupili smo prekrasnu kuću s velikim vrtom, savršenu za odgoj djece. Radila sam kao usateljika u osnovnoj školi, pozeo koji mi je spanjava zadovoljstvom. Javier je, pak, gradio uspješnu karijeru kao odvjetnik. Naši su dani bili ispunjeni ljubavlju i smijehom. A bilo još uže dezdjubtecija, vlvue, obrfek. Javier me uvijek iznenadio romantičnim detaljima, cvijećem, ljubavnim porukama i neočekivanim darovima. Bio je pazeljev, ljubazan, savršen maz. Pozebno si šakam nes pit godisnjaj spraka. Javier mi odvio u luksuzni hotel na placi. Hodali smo po pijesku pod zvijezdama, nazdravljali šampanjcem i obećali jedno drugome vječnu ljubav. Tada sam osjećala da ništa ne može pokvariti našu sreću. Također smo puno vremena provodili s Valerijom i njenom obitelji. Nasa by Jeka odrasla zajedno kao rodosi I najbolji prijatelji, ba kao estio smo Valerija I jabil. Imali bismo obiteljske roštilje nedjeljom, išli na zajednička putovanja. Bili smo ujedinjena i sretna obitelj. Olidus uiden gefuer, ashiž visvers onjeld sedgbub. Ufalid worinch ushwest eveld peit is ibilis udespoired joasm av beliv sud fakle. Bila sam toliko zaslijepljena ljubavju prema Javieru da nisam vidjela znakove, laži koje će postupno tkanje razaranja mog braka i mog odnosa sa sestrom. Da mi je netko tada rekao što će se dogoditi, nasmijala bih mu se u lice. Bilo je nemigus, nezamislivo da by Javier I Valerija mogli usinati nesto tako estio protiv min. Povtorila sam im svoj život, ali život ima okrutni nasan iz nenadavanja, testaranja cijake I najasi viza, a moj test je bio predstavljisi. Test koji će me gurnuti do ruba snage i natjerati me da preispitam sve što sam mislila da znam o ljubavi, obitelji i odanosti. Tada sam živjela u balonu blaženstva, nesvjesna oluje koja se sprema na horizontu. Kad bih barem znala, kad bih barem obratila više pažnje. No, nisam i to je krivnja koju ću nositi do kraja svog života. Sve je počelo s malim promjenama, detaljima koji su isprva djelovali nevažni, ali su u retrospektivi bili prvi znakovi izdaje koju sam uskoro trebala otkriti. Javier je posio raditi ses. Uvijek je bio vrijedni radnik, ali ovo je bilo drugačije. Sai bedzudi azvrš je vođe igua, dob eblaljut. Kada bih ga pitala, govorio bi da radi na važnom slučaju na kojem tvrtka ovisi. Željela sam biti podrška njegovoj karijeri, znala sam koliko je naporno radio da bi stigao do tog mjesta, ali njegova odsutnost počela je težiti na meni. Naši trenuci zajedno postajali su sve rjeđi, romantične večere, vikend izlasci, sve je dolazilo u drugi plan. Također sam primijetila da je Javier bio emocionalno udaljeniji. Before we always shared our thoughts and feelings, but now there seemed to be a wall between us. When I would ask him if something was wrong, he would assure me that everything was fine, that he was just stressed about Work, I tried to be the perfect wife to support him in everything. I prepared his favorite meals, kept the house spotless, gave him his space when he needed it, but despite my efforts, I felt like we were drifting further apart every day. Then the unplanned trip started. Javier would tell me that he had to travel for work, sometimes at very short notice. They were always destinations within the country, but often to cities he had never mentioned before. When I would ask him for more details, he would get defensive, saying he couldn't share confidential information about his clients. I remember one day in particular when I found a hotel card in his jacket pocket while doing laundry. It was from a hotel in a city he never mentioned traveling to. When I confronted him, he became furious, accusing me of distrusting him. I felt so bad that I ended up apologizing myself, but the seed of doubt was planted. I started noticing more things: phone calls he was taking in another room, text messages he immediately deleted, a new perfume on his clothes that I hadn't bought him. My mind didn't want to believe it, but my heart knew something was terribly wrong. Javier, the man I had built a life with, my soulmate, was hiding something from me. It was in that period of doubts and suspicions that Valeria became my greatest support. She was always there to listen to me, to comfort me when I cried out of frustration and fear. We would spend hours on the phone, her assuring me that everything would be okay, that surely there was an explanation for Javier's behavior. Looking back, I realized the irony. I turned to my sister for comfort, not knowing that she was the source of my pain. I confided my deepest fears in her, while she looked me in the eye and lied to me, hiding her own deceit. But at that moment, Valeria was my rock, my only constant in a world that seemed to be crumbling around me. I would never have imagined that my own sister, my other half, could stab me in the back in the cruel way possible. I was about to discover the truth, a truth that would shatter me completely and change my life forever. But at that instant, in my naivety, I was clinging to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding, unable to glimpse the magnitude of the betrayal I was about to discover. The night I discovered the truth is etched in my memory. Javier had said he had to work late. Once again, I was at home correcting my students' homework, trying to distract myself from the worry that was eating away at me. Around 11 p.m., I decided to call Javier, just to hear his voice, to make sure he was okay, but his phone rang and rang with no answer. I tried several more times with the same result, a knot formed in my stomach. On impulse, I decided to go to his office. Maybe he was so immersed in his work that he didn't hear the phone. I needed to see him, to hug him, to feel that everything was okay between us. I drove to the building where he worked, but when I arrived, the lights in his office were off. The security guard told me Javier had left hours ago. My heart sank. Where was he? Why had he lied to me? In that moment of desperation, I did something I had never done before. I decided to track his location by the GPS on his phone. I knew it was an invasion of her privacy, but the doubts were eating me alive. I needed to know. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Javier wasn't anywhere related to his work. He was in Valeria's apartment. A million thoughts flooded my mind. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Valeria needed help with something and Javier had gone to assist her. But deep down, I knew I was fooling myself. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in a horrible way. With my heart in my fist, I drove to Valeria's apartment. I climbed the stairs in a trance, fearing what I might find, but needing to know the truth. When I reached her door, I heard voices on the other side, laughter, Javier's unmistakable voice, and then silence, followed by sounds that left no doubt as to what was happening inside. My world collapsed in that Instant my husband, the man I loved more than anything, was having sex with my twin sister. The betrayal was so deep, so visceral, that I felt as if my heart had been ripped from my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. I stood there, listening to the echoes of her betrayal as tears ran down my cheeks. How could they do this to me? How could they destroy our family, our vows, our trust? One don't know how long I stood there, frozen in shock and pain. Eventually, I crawled back to my car, driving home on autopilot, not really remembering how I got there when Javier arrived home hours later, pretending he had been working the whole time. I could barely look at him. The rage, the pain, the betrayal all boiled up inside me. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but the words got stuck in my throat. That night, as he slept next to me, as if nothing had happened, I cried silently, choking my sobs into my pillow. My marriage, my relationship with my sister, everything I valued most in life had shattered in an instant. I knew I had to face them, demand the truth, but I also knew that truth came with a price. Nothing would ever be the same again. The pain of that betrayal would be with me forever. That night marked a before and after in my life. The naive and trusting Sophia died, and in her place a broken woman was born, betrayed by the two people I loved most in the world. And this was just the beginning of a painful road I could never have imagined I would travel. The next few days were a blur of pain and confusion. I tried to go about my daily routine, going to work, cooking, cleaning, as if nothing had happened, but inside I was a wreck. Every breath hurt, every thought was torture. Javier noticed that something was wrong. He constantly asked me what was wrong, why I was so distant. I made excuses, headaches, stress, at work, anything to avoid confrontation. I wasn't ready to face it, to make this nightmare real, but I couldn't avoid it for forever. One night over dinner, Javier pushed me one more time, and something inside me snapped. All the pain, the anger, the betrayal I had been holding back came pouring out. I screamed at him, asked him how he could do this to me, how he could betray our vows, our love. I told him I knew everything, that I had seen them. The expression on his face went from confusion to shock and finally to guilt. He didn't deny it, she couldn't. Instead, he began to cry, to beg my forgiveness. He told me it was a mistake, that he never meant to hurt me, that Valeria had seduced him, that he had been weak. He tried to take my hand, but I pushed it away as if his touch burned. I demanded to know how long this had been going on, if he had ever loved me. His answers were like stabs in my heart. The affair had begun months ago, shortly after I started working late, and yes, he loved me, but he had also fallen in love with Valeria. I think it was at that moment that I really understood the magnitude of his betrayal. It wasn't just a slip, a one-night mistake. It was an entire relationship built on lies and deceit, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. With tears in his eyes, Javier told me that Valeria was pregnant. She was expecting his child, my nephew. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The idea of my sister carrying my husband's child, it was too much to take, and I got up from the table, unable to be near him for a moment longer. I told him to leave, that I couldn't see him. I needed time to process this, to decide what to do that night. While Javier stayed in a hotel, I called Valeria. I needed to hear it from her. I needed her to explain how she could do something like this, but she didn't answer, not that night nor the following ones. It was as if she had disappeared off the face of the earth, leaving me to deal with the consequences of her betrayal. In the days that followed, I could barely function. I called in sick to work, unable to face the outside world. I spent my days crying, trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so quickly. My parents were devastated when I told them they couldn't believe Valeria could do something like this. Our family, once so close, was now fractured by betrayal. Javier tried to talk to me several times, begging my forgiveness, promising to end things with Valeria, but every time I saw him, I decided I needed to get away, gain some perspective away from the chaos my life had become. I packed my bags and checked into a hotel across town. I needed time to think, to heal, to decide what to do next. The first few days were a blur of tears and sleepless nights. I would sit by the window for hours watching the city go by, trying to understand how my life had taken such a drastic turn. Javier would call me constantly, leave pleading messages begging me to come home to give him a chance to explain himself, but I couldn't. Every time I heard his voice, images of him with Valeria came flooding back, and the pain was too much to bear. Valeria also tried to contact me. She would leave messages, send me long, emotional emails. She said she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me, that things just got out of control. She begged for my forgiveness, for a chance to explain herself, but I couldn't face her. The betrayal of a husband is devastating, but the betrayal of a sister, of a twin, it's a different pain altogether. Valeria was my other half, the person who is supposed to be by my side through everything. How could she do this to me? In the silence of my hotel room, I found myself going over every moment of my marriage, every interaction between Javier and Valeria, looking for signs I should have seen. Were their glances that last too long, casual touches that seemed innocent at the time? How could I have been so blind? I also thought a lot about the baby, my husband and sister's child, an innocent child who asked for none of this. What kind of life would he have born of such deception? How could we be a family after this? Weeks passed, and slowly through the pain I began to feel a glimmer of clarity. I knew I couldn't stay in this marriage, not after such a profound betrayal, but I also knew I had to find a way to move forward, to not let this betrayal define the rest of my life. I called a lawyer and began the divorce process. It was heartbreaking, dismantling the we had built together, but I knew it was necessary. Javier didn't fight me, I think. He knew deep down that what he had done was unforgivable. Valeria kept trying to contact me, but I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. The betrayal of a sister is a wound that does not heal easily. Slowly, day by day, I began to rebuild my life. I went back to work, finding solid in the routine and in the smiles of my students. I hung out with friends, those who had been by my side through it all. I even started seeing a therapist, trying to untangle the mess of emotions I carried inside. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the pain threatened to overwhelm me again, but little by little I began to find my way. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I had to keep moving forward, one day at a time. Maybe in time I would find a way to forgive, not for them, but for myself. Maybe in time this betrayal would become a painful but distant memory, but for now all I could do was keep breathing, keep living, and hope that someday the pain would not be so acute. It was a new chapter in my life, one I never asked for, but one I would have to write anyway, and I was determined to do it on my own terms. Months passed, and little by little I began to feel like I was regaining control of my life. The divorce was finalized, and although it was painful, it also brought a sense of closure. I was no longer tied to Javier, to his lies and betrayals. I moved into a new apartment, smaller but cozy. Decorating it was therapeutic, like creating a new beginning for myself. Every piece of furniture I chose, every color I painted on the walls was an affirmation that I could and would move forward. At work, I focused on my students more than ever, their innocence and zest For life for a BL to my wounded soul I began staying late to plan more creative lessons, looking for ways to make their learning more fun and engaging. My friends were a constant support. They dragged me out of the house on weekends, insist that I needed to keep living. Gradually I began to laugh again, to feel glimmers of the old Sophia resurfacing, but despite the progress the pain was still there, especially when I thought of Valeria. I still hadn't been able to face her despite her many attempts at contact. Every time I considered seeing her, a new torrent of pain and betrayal poplave su mi priplaval. Znala sam od naših roditelja da Valijina trudnoća napreduje. Bili su uzbuđeni zbog novog unuka, ali su također tugovali zbog razdora koji je Valijina izdaja stvorila u našoj obitelji. Sesto sam si pitala o bebi. Hosli lisataj nevjera? Hoće li imati Valijine oči? Unatoč boli, nisam mogla prestati brinuti o ovom novom članu obitelji, toliko nevino i nesvjesno okolnosti svog začeća. Javier je pokušao kontaktirati mi nekoliko puta nakon razvoda, ali nisam bila zainteresirana za njegova isprike ili objašnjenja. On je napravio svoj izbor i sada je morao živjeti s posljedicama. Kako se približavao Valijinin termin poroda, osjećala sam rastući osjećaj nelagode. Znala sam da ne mogu zauvijek izbjegavati svoju sestru, pogotovo sada kada ćemo biti povezani ovim djetetom. Ses fuzijov iš zelp jaj dobilt izifev gdevlut inž as sdojesva. Moj teraput mi upateo sto si nadam postasai is jagavanjam valarij, jezum li si nadala de si bol nastadi, de si save for tajtaj onako kako je bilo. Shvatila sam da sam se držala jutnje i boli jer je bilo lakše nego suočavanje s stvarnošću, ali izbjegavanje Valerije neće promijeniti ono što se dogodilo. Nisis brsati izdađuniti si popraviti godin laci. Napustila sam tu sesiju s novim odlučnošću. Morala sam se suočiti s Valerijom, ne zbog nje, već zbog sebe. Morala sam poslušati njezino objašnjenje, ne zato što bih je oprostila, već zato što sam trebala razumjeti. Tek tada bih mogla stvarno krenuti dalje. Te noći, prvi put nakon mjeseci, poslala sam Valeriji poruku. Zolob unj iseć v unj džozarod edivrbziv, fesirju az dedfef. Bila je to jedna od najtežih poruka koje sam ikad morala poslati, ali je također osjećala kao neophodan korak. Nisam znala sto si donađati ovaj susret ili hokalijak hada potpuno oprostiti Valeriji, ali sam znala da moram pokazati radi sebe, že na kraju, ova prika nij bila samo o izdaji, bekaj mom vlastitom putovanju ozdravljenja I ponovnog otkrivanja. Bila sam spremna napraviti sljedeći korak. Dan kada sam se susrela s Valerijom bio je sivi kišni dan, kao da vrijeme odražava oluju emocija unutar mene. Dogovorili smo se da se sastanimo u mirnom kafika na Rubograda, neutralnom tlazije tesku razgovor koja nas je sekala. Stigla sam rano, naručila kavu koju nisam imala namjeru piti, ruke su mi se tresal dok sam čekala, prevrćući u mislima sve stvari koje sam željela reći, sva pitanja koja sam trebala postaviti. Kada je Valerija ušla, gotovo je nisam prepoznala. Njezin trbuh bio je napuhan trudom, a lice je pokazivalo znakove umora i stresa, ali su me najviše pogodile njezine oči. Bile su ispunjene boli i kajanjem kakve nikada nisam vidjela. Sjele smo u nespretnoj tišini, niti jedna od nas nije znala kako početi. Napokon je Valerija počela govoriti, riječi su izlazile iz nje u bujici emocija. Isprkala mi je save, kako je romance zapasila, kako je Javier namorno pregonio, kako je podlesla iskizanju. Govorila je o zaljubljivanju, uzbuđenju zabranjenog, Ali je također govorila o kajanju, o krivnji koja ju je proždirala svaki put kad me je pogledala u oči. Slušala sam, pokušavajući razumjeti, pokušavajući pomiriti ovu Valeriju s onom sestrom koju sam poznavala i voljela cijeli život. Tada, s suzama u očima, Valerija mi je rekla nešto što je promijenilo sve. Javier joj je rekao da sam bila svjesna njegove afere, da smo imali otvoren brak, da sam ga natjerala da povjeruje da mi je bilo u redu s njihovim odnosom. Kao da je manja probila magla boli iz banjanosti, očnem je save malo novaj smisao. Debašas paids was odžušlos as da sepes. Manipulirao je i lagao nama obje, igrajući se s našim životima kao da su komadi na šahovskoj ploči. Valerija je sada otvoreno plakala, Melisa je moja prostanj. Solo beziv. Razumjela ako je nikada ne bih mogla oprostiti, ali je trebala da znam istinu, a tamo u tom malom kafiću osjetila sam da se nešto promijenilo unutar mene. Nije bilo oprosta, barem ne još, ali bilo je razumijevanja, empatije koju nisam očekivala osjetiti. Jer unatoč svoj boli i izdaji, Valerija je još uvijek bila moja sestra i sada, vidjevši pravu dubinu Javierove manipulacije, nisam mogla ne osjetiti da smo nekako obje bile žrtve njegovih laži. Razgovor esi potom okrenuo bebi. Valerija mi je rekla da planira odgajati dijete sama, da ne želi imati nikakve veze s Javierom, da želi da njezin sin odrasta daleko od toksičnosti i prijevare. Kada smo se rastale tog dana, bilo je to s novim razumijevanjem, novom povezanošću oblikovanom u vatri zajedničke izdaje. Naić bilo oprosta, beram ani jas, ali bio je to postak. Dok sam hodala kući na kiši, osjećala sam da se nešto promijenilo unutar mene. Bol je još uvijek bila prisutna, vjerojatno će uvijek biti do neke mjere, ali sada je postojalo nešto drugo, odlučnost da ne dopustim da ova izdaja odredi moj život, da ne dopustim Javierovim lažima da unište vezu koju imam sa sestrom. Znala sam da put pred nama neće biti lagan. Biće dana kada će bol biti nepodnošljiva, trenutaka kada će jutnja ponovno izbiti, ali prvi put nakon dugo vremena osjećala sam iskru nade. Akeo mogu prenesai nesen da kroz ovo prodom, akeo mogu prenesai nesen da esi is legesimija prostom, onda matsta, samo matsta. Nesto dobromos proizasi is save ti boli. Nakon tjedana nakon mog susreta s Valerijom prošlo je u magli. Nastavila sam s dnevnim životom, ali sada s novom perspektivom. Valerijina otkrića o Javierovoj manipulaciji promijenila su sve i našla sam se preispitujući svaku interakciju, svaku uspomenu u ovoj novoj svjetlosti. Javier je pokušao kontaktirati me nekoliko puta, možda naslučujući da se nešto promijenilo, ali nisam bila spremna suočiti se s njim, barem ne još. Trebala sam vrijeme da obradim i odlučim kako želim nastaviti. Umeđu vremenu, Valerija I ja posil smo polako obnovoljati nas odnos. Počelo je s malim stvarima, poruka ovdje, kratki telefonski poziv tamo. Postepeno smo počele viđati se češće, samo kako bismo sjedile i razgovarale, pokušavajući ponovno razumjeti jedna drugu. Nije bilo lako, bilo je trenutaka ljutnje, ponovne boli, ali su također bili trenuci povezivanja, ozdravljenja. Polako smo posil pronalaziti, put natrag jedna du druž. Rodenj valajin bibi bilo je preokretnika. Kada sam prvi put držala svog nečaka, nešto se promijenilo unutar mene. Ovo dijete, toliko nevino i čisto, bilo je podsjetnik da život ide dalje, da ljepota može proizaći čak i iz najbolnijih okolnosti. Valerija je nazvala majčinstvo kao sampijen, anatok svim podaskakama. Vidjeti je s njezinim sinom, tako ljubaznom i zaštitničkom, podsjetilo me na Valeriju koju sam uvijek poznavala i voljela. Otprilike u to vrijeme konačno sam odlučila suočiti se s Javierom. Trebala sam kuti njegovo objasnjenje, trebala sam da prizna stata koju je prizročio. Na susret bio je nepet I emotivan. Javier je pokuso braniti.